George Russell took pole in Barcelona, but the biggest shock was not the lap. It was what happened next. Because Mercedes did not just beat Lewis Hamilton by a tiny margin. Mercedes did it while already sitting under one of the biggest technical microscopes in Formula One, with rivals questioning its engine, its electrical power, its qualifying tricks, and the hidden systems that could decide a lap by hundredths. And now, Russell's pole is not just being celebrated. It is being questioned. There is no confirmed ruling that the lap was illegal, but that is exactly why this is dangerous. Because in Formula One, suspicion moves faster than proof, and once rival teams believe a car has found something hidden, the entire paddock turns into a courtroom. If Mercedes is clean, Russell's pole could prove the Silver Arrows have cracked the new era before everyone else. But if the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile finds one detail, one setting, one loophole, one rule stretched too far, Barcelona could become the lap that puts Mercedes' entire championship fight at risk. Subscribe to the channel. The first thing to understand is that Barcelona did not create the doubt around Mercedes. Barcelona gave the doubt a target. Before George Russell even left the garage for that qualifying lap, Mercedes was already carrying the weight of a season full of questions. Not casual questions. Not normal rival frustration. Serious questions about where its performance was coming from, and whether the rest of the grid was even looking in the right place. That is what made Russell's pole so explosive. If this had been any other team, people might have talked about bravery, precision, and one perfect lap under pressure. They might have praised the driver, praised the engineers, and moved on to the race. But this was Mercedes. And this season, a fast Mercedes does not just create applause. It creates suspicion. The reason is simple. The new era of Formula One has made performance harder to see. In the past, fans could understand the basics more easily. A car had a strong engine, a clever wing, better balance, more grip through corners. Now, the biggest gains can be hidden inside systems most people never see. Energy recovery, electrical deployment, software behavior, engine performance under heat, the exact moment power arrives, the exact moment it fades. That is where the modern battlefield is. And when a team keeps finding speed in those invisible areas, rivals do not just feel beaten. They feel blind. That is the nightmare Mercedes has created for the paddock. The Silver Arrows have not only been fast. They have been fast in ways that force other teams to ask whether the advantage is coming from something deep inside the car, something that cannot be copied from a photograph, something that only appears when engineers start digging into data. And this is where the suspicion around Russell's Barcelona pole really begins. It begins before the lap. It begins with the earlier questions about the Mercedes power unit. Rivals had already raised concerns about how the engine behaved when it was hot and running at full pressure. That detail matters, because a car can pass one kind of check and still raise questions under real racing conditions. Think of it like judging a pair of running shoes while they are sitting on a shelf, then discovering they react differently once a runner is sprinting. On the shelf, everything looks normal. Under pressure, the truth becomes more complicated. Mercedes had already faced that kind of scrutiny. The team was not proven guilty by those questions, but the atmosphere changed. Once the governing body starts looking more closely at a car, every future result carries extra meaning. And then came the electrical power controversy. That was the part of the season that made rivals even more sensitive. The hybrid system in these cars is not just background technology. It can decide qualifying. It can decide who starts first. It can decide whether a driver has clean air or spends the race trapped behind another car. For Russell, that matters because pole was decided by a tiny margin. And in Formula One, tiny margins are where suspicion lives. Mercedes and Red Bull had previously found a way to use an emergency shutdown function in the hybrid system in a way that raised major concerns. That function existed to protect the car if something went wrong. It was meant for safety, not performance. But used in a certain way, it could help avoid the normal reduction of electrical power near the end of a flying lap. That sounds small. It was not. Because at the end of a qualifying lap, when every tire is stressed, every corner exit matters, and every driver is squeezing the final drops of performance from the car, even a few hundredths can change everything. A few hundredths can beat Hamilton. A few hundredths can take pole. A few hundredths can start a technical war. That is why rival teams reacted. The governing body stepped in. A technical directive made clear that this emergency function could not be used as a qualifying trick. It had to be reserved for real technical problems. On paper, that should have ended the issue. But Formula One does not forget so easily. Once a team has found one hidden edge, everyone assumes there may be another one. That is the burden Mercedes carried into Barcelona. Russell's lap was not being judged as a single moment. It was being judged as the latest chapter in a pattern. power unit concerns, electrical deployment questions, emergency shutdown controversy, front wing scrutiny, qualifying strength, and now, Barcelona pole. One by one, those pieces created a story bigger than the stopwatch. That is why the reaction was so immediate. Russell had not just gone fastest. He had gone fastest in a Mercedes, in a season where Mercedes was already the car rival teams wanted explained. And the front row made the drama even sharper. Lewis Hamilton was right there in second. His Ferrari was close enough to make the margin feel painful. This was not a dominant gap that could be dismissed as a simple car advantage. It was narrow. It was delicate. It was exactly the kind of result where one hidden detail can feel decisive. Hamilton missing pole by almost nothing changed the emotional temperature. Because Hamilton is not just another rival. He knows Mercedes. He knows how that team operates. He knows the culture, the expectations, the way performance is found and protected. So when Russell beats Hamilton in a Mercedes by such a slim margin, the story instantly becomes personal and political. Ferrari will want answers. Red Bull will watch closely. McLaren will pay attention. And Mercedes will have to defend not only the result, but the legitimacy of the speed that created it. That is the key point. Russell's pole is not in doubt because he failed to deliver. It is in doubt because he delivered at the exact moment when Mercedes was least likely to be trusted without questions. That is cruel for the driver. Because Russell still had to do the hard part. He still had to place the car perfectly. He still had to trust the tires, manage the pressure, and complete the lap without a mistake. No hidden system can replace that. But when a car is under scrutiny, the driver's brilliance becomes tied to the machine's reputation. If the car is trusted, the lap is heroic. If the car is questioned, the lap becomes evidence. And right now, Mercedes is not being treated like a normal fast car. It is being treated like a puzzle. That is why Barcelona matters so much. This is not just about whether the lap stands. The source does not confirm any final ruling that Russell's pole was illegal. But the larger question is already alive. Can Mercedes keep producing this kind of qualifying speed without triggering more scrutiny? Because the more often the silver arrows do it, the more rivals will push. And in Formula 1, pressure does not need to prove guilt immediately to change a season. It can force checks. It can force clarifications. It can force new directives. It can force a team to explain the very thing that made it dangerous. That is the first real threat to Mercedes. Not that Russell's lap has already been taken away, but that the lap may have made the spotlight impossible to escape. Because if the car passes every check, Mercedes becomes even more frightening. It means the team is fast, clever, and legal. It means rivals are chasing a weapon they cannot ban and cannot yet match. But if one detail fails, even a small one, then everything changes. The lap becomes part of a pattern. The pattern becomes a case. And the case becomes a threat to Mercedes' entire advantage. That is why the first block of this story does not end with celebration. It ends with pressure. Russell put the car on pole. But now Mercedes has to prove the car deserves to stay there. But the second layer is where the pressure becomes much more dangerous. Because Mercedes is not only dealing with suspicion from fans or noise from the paddock. The real threat begins when rival concern turns into regulatory attention. That is the moment everything changes. A team can survive gossip. It can survive headlines. It can survive angry comments from rivals after a painful qualifying defeat. But when the governing body starts looking closely, the story moves into a different world. Data matters. Definitions matter. Intent matters. And one sentence in the rulebook can decide whether a car is brilliant, or whether it has gone too far. Mercedes already learned that lesson earlier in the season with the electrical shutdown controversy. This is the part of the story that makes Russell's Barcelona pole feel so sensitive. The issue was not a visible part everyone could point at. It was not something obvious, like a wing hanging off the car or a tire being used incorrectly. It was hidden inside the hybrid system, in the way electrical power was managed at the most critical point of a qualifying lap. The car had an emergency shutdown function for the motor generator unit kinetic. That sounds complicated, but the idea is simple. The car uses recovered electrical energy to help push itself forward. And when something goes wrong, the system needs a way to protect itself, like a phone shutting down before the battery overheats. That emergency function was supposed to be there for protection, not performance. But Mercedes and Red Bull found a way to use it in qualifying that raised serious questions. By triggering the shutdown in a specific way, the car could avoid the normal reduction of electrical power near the timing line. And that small detail mattered massively. Because the end of a qualifying lap is where a driver needs everything the car has left. The tires are already suffering. The brakes are hot. The driver has already risked the lap through every previous corner. And then, at the final stretch, the difference between fading power and stronger power can be the difference between pole and second place. That is why rival teams reacted. This was not about a massive performance jump. It was about the kind of tiny gain that decides Formula One. The kind of gain that looks invisible to fans, but screams at engineers. A few hundredths here. A cleaner pull to the line there. A small advantage at exactly the moment another car has to obey the normal reduction. That is enough. And once the governing body stepped in, it sent a message to the entire paddock. That emergency function could not be used as a qualifying trick. It had to be reserved for genuine technical problems. And if the system shut down during a lap, it would be locked out for a full minute. That was not a gentle warning. That was a door being slammed shut. A full minute without that system is a disaster in racing terms. It makes deliberate use almost useless. It turns a clever loophole into a risk no serious team would want to carry. But even though the directive closed that specific trick, it opened a bigger question around Mercedes. If the team had found that advantage once, what else had it found? That is the question that follows clever teams everywhere. The best engineers in Formula One do not just build fast cars. They search for the spaces between the rules. They look for what is written, what is not written, and what the wording allows before the governing body decides the meaning should be tighter. That is legal innovation, until it is not. And that is the uncomfortable zone where Mercedes has been living. The silver arrows have been cleared in key moments. They have not been proven illegal in Barcelona. The source material does not confirm a final ruling against Russell's pole. But the pattern is impossible to ignore. Mercedes keeps finding performance in areas that require explanation. And once performance requires explanation, rivals keep pushing for checks. That is how pressure becomes a weapon. Ferrari does not need to prove Mercedes cheated in public to make life difficult. Red Bull does not need a smoking gun to ask questions. McLaren does not need to know the full answer to demand clarification. They only need enough doubt to force another look. And in Formula One, another look can be enough to change everything. Because a car can pass a test today and lose an advantage tomorrow through a new interpretation. A lap can stand, while the system behind it gets restricted. A team can keep its result, but lose the tool that helped create it. That is the hidden danger for Mercedes. Russell's pole may not be taken away. But the scrutiny around it could still hurt Mercedes if it leads to another technical directive, another clarification, or another limit on how the car can use its strengths in future qualifying sessions. That is why the word investigation feels so explosive. It does not only suggest punishment. It suggests vulnerability. It suggests that Mercedes' advantage is not invisible anymore. It suggests that rivals may have found the area where pressure can be applied. It suggests that the governing body may be forced to decide whether Mercedes is simply clever, or whether the rules need to be tightened again. And that is where the Barcelona margin becomes so important. Russell did not beat Hamilton by a comfortable amount. He beat him by almost nothing. In a result that close, every hidden detail becomes emotionally enormous. If the gap is tiny, one small advantage can feel like the whole story. That does not prove anything illegal. But it explains why Ferrari would care. Hamilton was close enough to believe pole was possible. If Ferrari suspects Mercedes had even a slight advantage from energy deployment, software behavior, or another interpretation, the frustration becomes unavoidable. Red Bull would care too, because Verstappen had already questioned earlier Mercedes' acceleration. When a rival has already looked at the car and said, in effect, that does not look normal, every future Mercedes pole becomes part of the same file. And McLaren would care because any team fighting near the front knows that technical advantages can snowball.